All right, Kevin, back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I am here with Adolfo Gómez Sánchez. Adolfo, welcome. So awesome to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Kevin. Such an honor to be on your podcast.
Same. And you and I got to connect previously. And I'll tell you, I have really been looking forward to this because Adolfo, you and I, we are certainly in alignment when it comes to core values, and I've been really looking forward to doing this interview, having this conversation, and just giving you the opportunity to share your story around this topic of relationships. And so what I want to do is I want to start out really quick. I want to give a quick shout out to the folks over at Podcast Guest, the podcastguest.com platform. You and I wouldn't even be talking today if not for them and the work that they're doing. And I really appreciate those guys. And I've met some really amazing entrepreneurs through their platform. And of course, Adolfo, that's how you and I met as well. And what
That's right.
what a testament to the power of relationships right there, which is what this is all about. And so
exactly.
what we'll do is I want to start by turning it over to you so we can set a little bit of context and the listeners can really get an idea of who you are and what you're about, Adolfo. And so we'll start by going there and give you an opportunity to talk about, what you do, who you serve, what inspires you most about the work you do, and also give us some backstory into how you got into doing what you do and how we got here today.
Super. Well, thanks, Kevin. Well, one of the things that resonated when I spoke with you originally was, this issue of gratitude. And I think, much more than whatever people can believe that it generates or it helps you manifest. I think this gratitude is just important to keep yourself humble, right? There was a great lady, I can't remember her name, but she wrote she's PhD and she wrote it was a poker champion, and she said people tend to massively overestimate their participation when things go well and massively underestimate their own fault when things go poorly. And I think it's really healthy to do the opposite, right? And I think, my whole life has just been a series of circumstances which were lucky and people I ran into. And sometimes you don't even realize it at that moment, but you look back on it and you say, wow, that really served me, right? This whole concept of gratitude in relationships, I underscored 100%. And I think, as human beings and as the world evolves, we get so wrapped up in short term and technology and all this stuff. And we just forget that, business, sports, I work in sports, everything is about people, right? It's really about managing people. And we are complex. Don't come with, anybody who's ever had a child, they don't come with instruction manuals. They don't, and those are the skills to me, we don't learn in school. And that affects so much the capacity for teams to work or individuals to work, to their optimal performance. And I think that kind of links in probably to your question about what we do. That's our tagline, right? So my obsession is around what drives individuals and teams to optimal performance. And the reason it's an obsession is because through my whole life, working with professional athletes, working with large corporations, multinationals, I found that very few actually manage to get to maximum potential. And the reason is, in each case it's different, right? It can be in organizations, it can be policy, it can be legacy, it can be lack of clarity, it can be leadership, it can be culture. But it's so I said, well, what is it that drives people to really optimally work? And I started modeling. So my background is I love to model things. And I started looking, and I took the science of sports, which is a great laboratory. And I said, what drives performance in sports? There's a lot of research done on that, plus the work I did. And then I said, okay, how could this apply to the world of business? And that's where we're, spending a lot of our time right now, because I think the model in business is really outdated. I think, 18th century industrial model, and we could talk hours about it, but a whole bunch of things that's really outdated, and especially the management model, right? And it's not what drives value. And there's obviously exceptions and there's outliers. But in general, I just see it's, you've got this small group of people at the top trying to drive a whole bunch of people through an incredibly quickly changing economy, and without actually having the skills to do that and thinking about, how do you transition? So one thing is to draw great PowerPoint document and say, this is where I want to go. The question is, how do you get there? And that's the hard part. And how do you take people along for the ride, right? What is the transition? What's the human voyage that goes through there? And what are the pieces, the pillars you have to build upon? Because, there's almost a naivete, in my opinion, around the concept of transformation, right? And I even see that with young athletes, but I definitely see it in corporations. Oh, we're going to, whatever, become an agile, flat organization. That's great, right? And so they draw this out and they go 6 months, let it be. And that's insane. Nothing great gets done in 6 months. Nothing. I mean, you look at musicians, violinists, nobody picks up a violin and plays perfectly the first day, right? Yet there's no space contemplated there for people to actually, and in an organization, to learn, to experiment, to fail, and to get good at something. So they expect to be able to transform quickly and being great at it. And that's just insane. It's absolutely insane. And that's why over 80% of transformations fail, because it's just not realistic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
man, that
so this is what we do. And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think about my own journey and the personal growth that I have gone through just to get to where I'm at right here, right now, doing what I get to do today. And it's been a journey. Since the seed was first planted with me of doing what I do was 12 years ago. And so it's been this journey. And Adolfo, I just turned 58 in July. And I feel at 58 years old, I'm just now really starting to figure a few things out.
Exactly. Yes, sir. And it's funny because I'll say a lot of times to people who've been through some startup or they're in a career change or whatever, and they say, I'm starting from zero. No, you're starting from experience, and it's really different. And I agree with you. I remember I've been doing martial arts since I was a kid. And I actually went off, a part of my journey was I went off to live in Japan and study under one of the masters in Aikido. And one of the things about martial arts that always, stuck in my mind was it's about going over, practicing until you get the fundamentals. And the fundamentals, is really, that's what being a black belt's about. It's about learning the fundamentals. And then you can apply that in a whole bunch of situations. And as I've grown and studied, you see that actually in top performers in every field. People forget about the fundamental, but you don't understand them the first time you learn them. That's just the way it is, right? You never get it. But every time you work on them, you start to get a deeper level of understanding. I mean, you listen to, you look at recordings of Kobe Bryant, he talks about his training regimen, and it was all around working the basics. And each time he did it, he understood them deeper, and it prepared it, hardwired it in his nervous system so that he could then bring that to his performance. And so I think that's one of the things that's so important. You were talking about, you're starting to get the feel for it. That's why we have to have an open mindset and a growth mindset. And one of the things I'll always say to CEOs when I meet them is, so what's your personal 5-year plan to be a better CEO? And they go, what? And I think you have to have that, because there's this stigma in business that you get to a certain level, C-suite, and you have to know all the answers. You can't actually ask, and you can't not know. And that's really bad, because if you look at the great athletes, the Tom Brady's, the Michael Jordans, once they were famous and once they were successful, they kept going, because that's just the basis, right? It's like the black belt, and that's the starting point. And we need that in business. We need people to start saying, so what don't I know? What could I learn? And if you're not willing to do that, how are you going to have an organization who is able to contribute to you? How are you going to create psychological safety in an environment, where you have to know all the answers and can't admit you're wrong, right? So it really trickles down. And I think that's the starting point, that mindset of what you just said. It took me this long to get here. Gee, how much can I learn in the next 10 years, right? Wow. It's probably a ton of, I don't know, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, the seed with me was first planted 12 years ago as far as, I had made this introduction for these two guys, and they went on to do amazing things together. And a year after I made that introduction, they were hosting this big event together. And that's when I first got thinking, I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I had a business where that's what I got to do all the time? And, and it took 12 years to get to where we're at right here, right now. But I look at where we're at right now, and it's been pretty awesome. In fact, it's been really awesome. But what really jazzes me is thinking about what's going to be happening in 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, as I just continue to step into this, as I continue to learn, as I continue to just get better and better at doing what I do in this. And it's a never ending process, Adolfo, as I'm sure you'll agree 100%. It never ends.
Because even it is, and it's because once you figure it out, then everything around you changes, right? And the paradigms that you thought were valid aren't. And I find it really useful to question. I'll even do that with athletes. I'll say, is what you're doing now what's going to get you to the next level? So there's a certain period you do certain things, and that's good for a period. But if you want to take it up to the next level, you have to challenge what you've done, and that's really uncomfortable, right? Because the whole problem, the whole system, society is kind of structured to say, don't step out of your lane, right? Follow the system. Choose one of these paths. You don't get to choose your own. It's what you get an option. You get a menu, right? You choose one of them, but don't step out of it. And I find real top performers like yourself, what they do is they find niches where certain things they're good at and like combined, and they create almost their own unique niche. I mean, I think what you do is a very unique, activity. And when you believe that you can then put those together and create a new value that nobody's done, that's where innovation comes through, right? When Steve Jobs comes into the music industry and he asks, hey, what if music, I don't have to sell the whole album. What if I get to sell a song? And oh my God, that's blasphemy, right? And the fact that he wasn't from the music industry was the big advantage, right? Well, what if it's digital instead of physical, right? What if you just download it, right? Oh God, you can't do that. But it's only when you ask, and within a business or even within a team, you have to ask yourself, right? Is what I believe, is it still valid, right? And that's what I think. There's almost like a fear to do it, right? Because if it's not, then it means I'd be doing it wrong. No, it just means the world is changing, and you're awake and you're realizing that. And there's a gazillion examples, the Kodaks, etc., who just didn't notice, like the boiling frog syndrome, right? Didn't notice the water was heating up slowly, and they just got totally knocked out of the game. And I see that even with professional athletes, right? As you're going up, you're young, and there's always, it's like the schoolyard, right? There's always one bigger kid or more talented kid or whatever. But when you get up to a certain level, everybody's good and talented, right? And so the question is, how do you distinguish yourself there? And a lot of times there's traits that aren't obvious or people aren't looking at. I mean, one of my things that fascinates me, guys like I mentioned, Tom Brady, the Joe Montanas, guys like David Ferrer, who's a big tennis player, right? Guys who didn't have the physical attributes, but ended up having, or Carles Pujol of the Barcelona Football Club, who was the captain, right? Who didn't have the physical attributes that were standard for the superstars, but they ended up being exceptionally successful superstars because they have other stuff, right? And you have to start looking and say, how can I leverage that, which nobody else is doing? And those are examples that nobody would say they weren't successful, right? So it's about finding your own path. I think that's what's really exciting. When I listen to you and your story, I think that's really exciting. It's you've carved out your own niche, which is a piece of here, and and you made something unique. And I think we need more and more people to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate what you shared, and man, you have a skill set and a unique ability that is just fascinating to me. And so we've got this context set now, and people have a little bit of an idea about who you are and what really jazzes you and what excites you and what inspires you. So now that we've done it, I want to shift gears just a little bit here, and I'm going to reiterate the question for the benefit of the listeners. So, Adolfo, have you ever been introduced to a person or persons that completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Sure. Actually, yeah, and just three. There's a lot of people that come up to mind because, like I said, I'm very grateful and fortunate to have met so many great people, but I'm being helped by them. But there's three that pop to mind, and they all have in common what we were talking about. I think they all taught me or gave me the confidence to say you can step out of your lane, and that's actually a superpower, right? So if I look at myself, and just really, really briefly, I mean, I combined I was always into, I was in martial arts, as I said, since I was young, back black belt in four styles, and then I in four different martial arts, and then I was competitive at tennis, and I played second division football, and so I was always anything that was competitive. And then there's this piece in my life where I go and I do my graduate degree at Yale, and I learn about organizational psychology, and so I'm from the academic point of view, I start seeing research about performance, right? And those are two different worlds. And that marriage is where I said, oh, that's my sweet spot, because I love them both. I understand them both. I'm good at both. And then that's where I brought it in. And the confidence to do that, just going back to your relationship question, comes from a series of different people. So the first one I'd like to mention is a fellow named Shuja Ali. Now, Shuja he was a classmate of mine at Yale, but he's just a spectacular individual. So he is a surgeon by training. And then I met him and we were doing a graduate degree there. And then he went on to to run one of the biggest funds in Dubai. So he learned about finance, he learned about investing, and one of the biggest healthcare. Well, it was funds, and he focused on healthcare and innovation in healthcare. And I thought, well, what a great way to, you study to be a doctor, you figure you're not going to actually practice. But he saw it just as a basis to then learn and get where he wanted to get and find this unique niche. And I remember him. He came out of, I think it was a McKinsey interview or something, and he got hired and he got the job, and they told him, because he was really cool under pressure. And he said to the McKinsey guy, says, look, I've had people die on my table, right, on my operating table. I'm not going to get nervous because you're yelling at me, right? And I thought, what a great way to take an experience from another area and bring it in and make yourself a spectacular, business person, negotiator, whatever, because you have that context. So that was one example that I started to think, well, what can I do that's unique? Because I had these paradigms, which was, I love sports, I love martial arts, but you can't make a big living off it, right? I mean, unless you're a professional player in a high profile league, you'll make a living. And then that's not true. As I've discovered, you can find niches where you can create tremendous value and make a lot of money, but you're just bringing your unique combination. And so he was one of the first ones who showed me that. And another person is a fellow named Peppo Clavet. He's very well known. He's one of the top tennis trainers in the world. So he's coached. It's just a celebrity list. Carlos Moya, Alex Correcha, Juan Monaco, Guillermo Garcia Lopez. He's now coaching Kachanov. He's really well known, but he's a guy, if you're not in the tennis industry on the ATP tour, you don't know him, right? Because he's always been in the background. Uh-huh. And he was one of the first guys so I knew him, and he was fascinated by what I was saying. I said, I want to work performance in tennis. It's a mental game. And he was one of the first guys who said, let's do it. People don't get it. There's going to be a lot of rejection, but let's do it. He says, I don't even know, but I know I need it. I know my team, my players need it. And he opened up the door and helped me start working with different players, and we started getting amazing results. And I'm always thankful because, in something he didn't know, he just intuitively got it, right? And he would say, he says, tennis players now don't know how to play tennis. They know how to smash the ball really hard, but they don't know how to play tennis, how to structure, how to run through a match, which has a whole bunch of psychological highs and lows. And he says, if you can teach them that is such a competitive advantage. And that was where we started working. And so I just take my hat off to, a guy who didn't have any training in performance, or sports psychology, and could see it so clearly. And it worked out really well. And I think the third person is a fellow, his name is Toñejo Rodriguez. And he is a former champion quad and motorcycle racer. He had 30 titles, whatever. And then he had an accident and he broke his back. And so he's in a wheelchair. And he's a very good friend of mine. And I just think he's the most amazing individual about, it's not what happens to you, it's the meaning you give it. So he broke his back and he's in the hospital. And he says to the doctor, says, since I can't get back on a motorcycle because I don't have legs, I can race jet skis because I can tie myself to a jet ski and I don't need my legs. And the doctor said, I don't think you realized what happened to you. And he's like, oh yeah, I'm aware, but I'm a competitor and I need to get back out there and compete. And that's what he did. He went off and he started competing. And then he won the Iberian Championships, and he went to the World Championships, and he did the pole position in the World Championships. And so he's sitting on the podium, and he calls his dad, right? And his dad says, well, how many crippled people were there or challenged people were there in the race? And he says, none, because I'm the same guy, just sitting down, right? And then he's just, wow, how mentally strong do you have to be, to do that? And he's just gone on. He's been the first, I think, Spaniard to drive a Formula One on water. He's done a whole bunch of amazing. He did the Dakar in a truck, especially the truck after he had his accident, right? And he's taught me, and I've taken him to client events with me. He's taught me, you just have to decide what you want and fight for it, and then the rest are just challenges that come along the way. And he says, I am the way I am. If I always jokes, he's a real fun guy. He says, if I got out of my wheelchair miraculously, I got my legs back, I'd probably end up in a wheelchair in 2 weeks because I'd race something really fast, right? He says, you just got to know who you are and then build off that. So I think those three people are examples of having the courage to step out of your comfort zone. And that's something that I find when I challenge clients, that's where they most get stuck, right? It's when we've always done it like this, the industry standard is this, I don't want to step out of that. And the ones who do are the ones who allow us to really just totally change the way they think. Yeah. And then we get huge results off that. We just worked with a really big infrastructure company, and because they allowed us to change the way they think from silos to what we call, instead of muscles, movements, right? Across processes, we were able to drive value across the group of like over 100 million, because they were open to thinking, okay, explain this to me. I think it works this way. Okay, and business, a lot of times processes are like the body, right? I work with this flexibility coach. She's an ex-form professional dancer. And she'll always say, your body is under no responsibility to make sense to you, right? And it's true. So, you have a tight hamstring, and that might affect you in your neck because it's all connected, right? And I think you have to holistically see businesses like that. And there's pieces that you may not even understand. But if somebody comes and shows you that, then you go, okay, wait a minute, I'm working on this, but I need to work on this, right? And get to the underlying strengths. And I think goes back to the basics. That's where people don't put in enough time, right? Is to say, okay, what could make me better? What basic have I skipped? What am I compensating for? Because we all have strengths and weaknesses. And what ends up happening, especially in a business, is it's like a body, right? When one muscle compensates for lack of mobility or strength, and another one, it gets over stressed, and it eventually breaks. And that's what happens to organizations. They've done well enough by focusing on one strength, but then market shifts, or they need to be able to be competitive. The areas they haven't done their homework on bites them in the ass, right? Because they don't have a full chain of efficiency. You look at any sports team, it's the same thing. If they're not balanced, they've got offense but not defense or whatever, you can get so far. But the great ones are actually pretty balanced. And they don't even have to have superstars all across the board. They just have to be consistently really good across in all of the key functions and all of their key, priorities. Bill Walsh published an amazing book on that, which is The Score Takes Care of Itself. And, it was all about, he brought to the San Francisco 49ers the concept that there's a standard of excellence and of performance. And if everybody does it from, the quarterback, which is Joe Montana at that time, to the water boy, then the organization will be successful. And I think, there's a lot in that. It's about, how do I do everything as best I can? Because we tend to say, oh, I'll just do this and this, and then that's not important. And the way you do, and, from my days on the ATP tour, I remember, everything is important. There was one he was a top 5 at one point player. And this coach was saying to him, the guy had been training, he didn't have a change of t-shirt. And he said, you're going to get cold. And he says, oh, geez, you're always on me. Everything's a problem with you. He says, exactly, because everything's important. And if you don't look after every detail, something is going to end up biting you in the ass, because everybody else is almost as good as you or a little better, right? And it's those little things that make the difference. If you were 10 times better, it wouldn't be a problem, but that's not the reality. And that's true in business. You're not usually 10 times better than your competitor, right? So it's the sum of the little things consistently apply that really set you apart.
Yeah. Wow. That's some really amazing insights that you just shared, Adolfo. I mean, deep stuff. And if you look at these three relationships, so I know the question I'm going to ask you, I'm sure you can come up with so many examples for, but I want to challenge you to just come up with one, and the first one that comes to mind for you. So if you look at the relationships that you have with these three people, and you look back over the years of those relationships, what is an example where you were empowered to make a really big impact, and hands down, that would have never been possible if not for your relationship with whichever person that you just spoke about? What is an example like that, Adolfo?
So I would say a good example is, I'll go back to the first one, which is Shuja, right? So Shuja is, besides this wonderful professional, he's also just a beautiful person. And he taught me you always have to give back. And through his work, he's always helped me whenever he could. And then I've always said, if I can help you. So he puts me in contact with people. One of them is this ex-rugby player who's built a business, and I was able to help this guy get a prototype in a very big company, was a client of ours, for his product. And it's all around health, employee well-being and mental health. And that to me is a way to sort of say, okay, if we get this off the ground, that really can impact hundreds of thousands of people, right? So it's a way to, and it's, and the guy was like, well, thank you. And I said, no, I mean, you come through Shuja, and he is the North Star of this, right? Anything he asks me to do, I will do, because I trust him so much. Yeah. And so I think if I hadn't had that relationship, I might have sort of weighted more my investment and my time. I just learned that you just do great things with brilliant people, and good things will happen. Right. And so he was, it's like I said, and he's a guy who's done it across so many fields, right? I mean, it's kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? I mean, everybody laughs at him, but he's been successful in 3 different fields. You can't be too stupid, right? You got to be a pretty bright guy to have that kind of success in 3 fields, right? So a guy who's been a surgeon, who's been tall, the CEO of a big investment company, biggest fund in Dubai, who's then done a whole bunch of nonprofit stuff, probably knows something, right? He's probably got some insights. And I am an insatiable learner. I love to absorb and learn from people, read tons of books. And so when you find a person like that, for me, it's just, let me just sort of follow you and suck up everything I can. And I think that's helped me on my worldview, and it's allowed me to impact and to do things. And from there, I've then done other initiatives, like my wife and I invested, and we built some facilities for children with special needs near where we live and stuff. And it just, and out of that, stuff comes up, and we actually just do it. And they say, what do you want? No, we don't want anything. We just do it because we're fortunate enough to be able to give back. And I think when you really start living that, then you start getting fulfilled, besides being successful, right? And I think nobody teaches you that either. So I would say that's my biggest thing, is to be able to impact and help others. And the bigger I grow our business, the more I figure I can help more people. So I think that's my big learning.
I love that, Adolfo. I know that has been my experience too. We can accomplish so much more when we are in collaboration and co-creation with like-minded people who share our core values. And it's kind of like when we're in the right environment with the right people for the right reasons, it's like magic happens. It happens every single time. And that's exactly what you just described. And
yeah.
So
it's that you just mentioned, I think there's so much to talk about abundance versus scarcity and stuff. I mean, to me, it's about that. It's not about measuring it to everything. It's just following your heart, right, and your soul, and saying it just feels right. I think when you and I met, I think I told you, a good friend of mine, she says, follow the energy, right? And that was what worked for me with you. It was, there's something about your energy that's right, that's aligned, and you just trust that. And 99% of the time, that takes you to a good place.
Yeah, for sure. And I can tell you, in my own life, for most of my life, I mean, for all my life, I've been just this really giving, generous person. In fact, I mean, I don't know a better feeling than the one that comes when we give to somebody who just really appreciates it. And I'm sure you have had this experience many times. It's kind of like you were alluding to that. But I've always been that guy. But for most of my life, I pretty much sucked when it came to the receiving side of things, because I would not want to bother people or whatever. And so even when they would ask me, hey Cam, what can I do to help you? I'm like, oh, I'm good, man. I'm good. And whatever reason. And I certainly wouldn't reach out and ask people for help because the whole thing, I don't want to bother them or inconvenience them. And about 11 years ago, a good friend of mine really presented me with some insight that I had never even thought of before. And he's like, Kevin, he's like, he's like, you love this feeling that comes when you give to others, especially giving to people who really appreciate it. And he's like, but yet, he's like, when you show up the way you do, kind of closed off to receiving, he's like, you are actually depriving others from having that experience that you just said was amazing. And he's like, you don't want to be doing that, do you? And I'm like, Jesse, I was like, I never considered it that way. And that was a serious pivot point in my life 11 years ago. And ever since then, I have been intentionally focused on I am going to continually expand my receiving muscle. And not only that, help other entrepreneurs do the same thing, because there's a whole lot of them, a very high percentage of them that are just like me, just like I used to be. And there is so many. You mentioned abundance heck, I watched that movie, The Secret, when it came out back in, 2004, 2005. And that was when we first started hearing about abundance, law of attraction, at least for me anyways. And there's been a lot of talk about it since then. But, this whole idea of us just showing up and just being our authentic selves and like you said, following the energy, because we can feel that. We totally feel that. And when we just follow that and follow, women have this thing called women's intuition. Us guys have it too, but we're more like a bull in a china shop, and we're too dang busy and headstrong to notice for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you were saying about giving and when people appreciate it, which is wonderful. What I learned, and I always said to my wife, is I learned that I give, the great part of giving is just for me. And so it just gets rid of the frustration of when people don't appreciate it. So a lot of times I'll do whatever I can for people. And a lot of times, maybe those people, when you reach out, they're not there, right? And my wife will get really upset about that. And I said, that's okay. People do the best they can with the resources they've got, right? So I don't do things expecting people to come back. It actually just makes me sad when I see people like that. I say, it's what you say. What a shame that you can't have, the bandwidth to do that and to help somebody else, because that's the way the world works. I mean, we are social animals. We live in communities, and there's a reason for that, right? I mean, I always think about, all the things that are invented, right? Everything from, vehicles to electricity to all that, right? No way I could have done even a 1% of that, right? But each one of us does one thing, and when we put it together, somebody takes that electricity and figures out they can charge a machine to do something else. And and that's, to me, the whole idea with the giving is about that, right? It's about making the cake bigger instead of sort of splitting a piece and get a bigger piece. It's making the cake bigger, and you never know how that comes back, right? So I've helped people who then 10 or 15 years later came back and built a business and said, hey, can you come help us with our business? And they gave me business, but at the time it's just to help them. So it's just wonderful when that happens. And when you stop keeping score, things, like you said, amazing things happen.
That's right.
And I think especially after the COVID pandemic, where people were so scared, so shut off, so I got to take care of myself. I think it's more important than ever. We need to get back to that point.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, Adolfo, I just really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. This has been awesome. And for anybody who's listening into this, going, man, Kev, I really Love Adolfo. I love the way he shows up. How can they find out more information about you and what you guys are doing and stuff?
Sure. Well, listen, I'm on LinkedIn, so just under my name, Adolfo Gómez Sánchez. You can find me in there and connect with me there. Also, we have our corporate webpage, which is www.gold-results.com.
Okay.
And there you get a really good idea of who we are and who we've worked with. And I think that page really gives you sort of a feeling of our identity. So yeah, I mean, I just love meeting new people. Anybody who wants to reach out and I can help, that's great. And again, that's the energy that you transmit, and I think I'll subscribe to that 100%. So yeah, glad anybody who's following Kevin and wants to reach out, please do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Adolfo, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate you. And I'm excited to get this out there and share it with a whole lot of other entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me on your amazing podcast. Thank you.
Absolutely.